Well, folks, thanks again for joining in today and joining the increasing number of people who are tuning in to day-to-day news with Stockwell Day. Appreciate that very much. We're up against the, as we say, the big guys and the big girls in mainstream media. So I'm giving you insights that you won't usually get or maybe ever get from mainstream media on the top stories. We're seeing in Canada something that borders on the miraculous, and that is that the stratospheric polling levels that Prime Minister Mark Carney enjoyed for a while, with media just absolutely drooling over him everywhere he went. His numbers are starting to drop, and so it is for the Liberals. And mainstream media is trying to say it's because he's backing off on the tariff fight with Trump, because mainstream media in Canada, of course, you will hardly find a group that hates Americans and the U.S. more than our own Canadian media does. In fact, there are other factors at play here. All of the announcements that Prime Minister Carney has been making of late have to do with more spending. He's talking about multi-billion-dollar funds where the government will pick and choose who the winners are going to be in certain types of businesses. We're talking about the fact he's going to be spreading dollars all around the place to help compensate for what he says are the results of the tariff wars. And what this is doing is increasing our debt. Citizens and Canadians are familiar with the story. They've seen this movie before. Debt increases. That can only mean that interest rates increase and taxes increase and businesses head south or close down. So they see the return of this Justin Trudeau type wave, and people don't like it. What we need to be hearing from the government is that they trust citizens to be innovative, to be investment savvy, and to be rewarded for their hard work, for their investments. You do that by easing off on the tax load, by easing off on the horrendous array of regulations that we get hit with as citizens at every level, municipal, provincial, federal, and state. These are the areas that people are waiting to hear some changes on, and Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, is going completely in the other direction. That's what's making people nervous, and I think the key reason you're seeing him drop in popularity in the polls. Big government does not have all the big answers. Unleash the creativity, the incentive, and the innovating power of citizens, and you'll see the economy start to turn around. The proof that the increase in spending that the federal Liberals are doing and are announcing, the proof that it makes people nervous, is where are Canadians and Canadian investment companies, where are they putting their money? And increasingly, we see Canadian money going south of the border, contrary to what mainstream media wants you to believe. Money going into U.S. stocks, corporate stocks, U.S. bonds, because people see that the approach being taken in the U.S. is stronger and bodes better in the future than what the Canadian approach of more debt leads to. So we're seeing increases there. Matter of fact, there's been an increase in investment, Canadian investment, like we haven't seen in the last 30 years. And in the short term, from April to May, looking at the investment reports, we see investments into U.S. stocks and bonds tripling between April and May. We are, as they say, as Canadians say, fierce Canadians and fierce patriots. But you know what? There's nothing like loyalty to one's future and one's wallet, and that's where the money is going, south of the border. Liberals, federal Liberals, Mr. Carney, wake up, please. Stop driving our money south of the border like this. When we see also investments and governments wanting to make sure, or they think they're going to make sure they're going to stay popular by looking at the social safety net, and we do need a social safety net, of course, especially for those who are not able to work, legitimately not able to work, but announcing that you are increasing the amount of employment insurance that people can receive when they're not working. That is not an incentive. Yes, of course we have to have employment insurance and some guarantees there for the tough times. But we all know, and we've seen it, it's recorded so clearly and can be demonstrated in the past, the higher you increase the employment insurance benefits, the more you get people not working as hard and choosing the benefits, putting in the minimum number of weeks and then choosing the benefits. And people would scoff at that and say, well, nobody wants to be unemployed. Well, the thought of being able to pick up a check every month and in fact not have to be working for it, that's not a bad proposition for a lot of people, especially if you're talking about people who don't have to be making house payments, people who aren't married, so they don't have to be thinking about caring for kids and the costs that go with that. Yes, there's a big audience for a greater level of employment insurance benefits. It's the wrong way to go. And it also has an impact on businesses because business, especially small business, has to also pay for the costs of that. That means they become less reluctant to hire more people. That means more people unemployed. And you can see that that vicious circle continues spiraling down. It's the wrong way, Liberals. Please take a hard look at that. Consider some changes. Also, when you look at benefits that are very costly and sometimes might not be that effective, I want you to think about this. A judge has just ruled relative to a case where, a very tragic case, 7 years ago, in one winter in Calgary, there were 2 deaths recorded to hypothermia. And in each case, it involved a young man being turfed out of a bar for being drunk and disorderly. And if you get turfed out of a bar in the middle of winter in Alberta, you know, that could be a challenging proposition. In these 2 tragic cases, which were not at the same establishment, these 2 young men died of hypothermia. That's heartbreaking for sure. And the judge has just ruled, this is years later, in that particular case. He's made a ruling. The judge has made a ruling, and I'm saying he or she because I'm mixing up the pronouns there to keep people happy, that there needs to be a law and needs to be imposed on all of these establishments saying, are you ready for this? They have to provide heated shelter outdoors near their bar or near their restaurant. They also have to provide free coats, which a lot of agencies already do, without the long and inefficient arm of government being involved, have to provide free taxi fare. Now, again, a lot of organizations already do this. What we don't need is judges starting to impose expensive social conditions on businesses. That is the job of the legislature. That's the job of Parliament, to be imposing social programs. There is some acceptance for judges being able to do this and make recommendations on review, but it's based on Section 24(1) of the Charter, which is very clear that judges can make recommendations relative to safety and other issues when it comes down to a person's rights, when it comes down to their constitutional human rights being deprived. It should not be a human right of an individual to think and know in his mind that he can go to the bar, get hammered, and it's his constitutional right to have cab fare or Uber fare to get home. It's his constitutional right to have a coat provided for him. If he goes outside, it's his constitutional right to have a warm, sheltered area outside of a bar that he's been refused entry to because he's been drunk and disorderly. Judges need to stay more in their lane and make these provisions relative to the application of human rights. Everything else needs to be left with the legislatures and with Parliament. Stay in your lane, folks. In the U.S. is also not immune to policies which, in fact, can hurt business, especially small business, and also be harmful to large business. And as much as small c fiscal conservatives are happy about the direction that President Trump is taking things, there's some worry that's setting in. Tariffs, which I can tell you as a former Minister of International Trade, I am not in favor of, but they do have a place in times of national emergency, and that's something that's getting argued in an extreme way in the States. So there's some concern there that the tariff effect might be going too far. But there's also some concern. We've seen a recent situation, surprising to some, where the White House has accepted a deal from a major tech business that's doing so well and committing to make an investment in the U.S. of huge proportions. And it's done on the basis that that business will give 10% of their shares to the government, making the government a partial owner. This isn't taxes they're talking about. It's government ownership of a business. This is called corporate capitalism. It does not work in the long run. It's a disincentive. It's been tried in Canada. Unfortunately, it is still tried in Canada. When I was Minister of Finance in Alberta, we looked at some of the investments that the provincial government made in terms of taking a percentage of certain businesses, especially with large business. They come and they say, we'll invest billions, but we need a few billion from the government. Well, if you have to get money from the government, maybe you should be taking a different look at your business sheet, at your profit and loss statements, because government getting involved, buying up percentages, a percentage stake in a business is never a good idea. Been tried. People should stay away from it. One of the reasons there's some softening in the U.S. economy, even though it's doing relatively well, is because people are seeing the government moving in these directions. They don't like it, and they're just holding off a little bit. On the other aspect of tariffs and a possible downside, we've seen the interesting development of tariffs hitting China and other countries very hard. And it's been one of the factors, and I've been talking about this for a while now, of the formation of this, let's call it a parallel group or a competing group against the U.S. And some people are calling it CRINC, China, Russia, India, North Korea. Other countries are now being pulled into this arc that China is developing. It's kind of like they're building their own Great Wall of China with a lot of other backers, other countries. And that's going to be a considerable threat, considering that some of these countries, Pakistan, China, North Korea, are nuclear equipped with weapons, Russia. So we've got an unsettling development happening there. And added to that, I don't know if you saw the news on this just a couple of days ago. This should alarm everybody. Here was the great lineup, and I'm sure you saw it. It showed the head of China, and it showed President Putin and others all lined up, and they were showing a great degree of solidarity, standing there with the gigantic military parade going on behind them. And picked up on a hot mic was a discussion between President Xi and between President Putin, and they were quietly talking about the marvelous breakthroughs that are being made in terms of organ transplant, in terms of stem cells, which can rejuvenate the aging process or turn it around. And they were actively discussing, quietly, but picked up on the mic, the fact that they could live easily to 100, 150. One of them even said at one point, maybe forever. So here you've got dictators with nuclear power and huge power within their own countries. They completely eliminate anybody who speaks against them. And they are dreaming, fantasizing about living maybe for 150 years, maybe forever. Scary combination, folks. And just another reason that we need to stand up to non-democratic countries that are also trying to oppose us in these other areas. Now, add to that one more dimension, and I'm just asking that we take a look of caution here, because in the province of Guangdong, where I have visited a number of times, and it's an amazing province with some of the infrastructure developments and other things that are going on, they say there's another infectious outbreak. This time, apparently, it's to do with mosquitoes, and it's called, the virus is called, pardon me on the pronunciation, but chikungunya, and it's in Guangdong, and they're talking about vaccines, massive vaccine program to deal with this spread of a certain types of infection from the mosquitoes. We've had this bad movie before where there's been an outbreak in China, and the outbreak leads to a worldwide so-called pandemic requiring massive mandates. We've seen that movie just recently. It doesn't go well. All I'm saying is keep an eye on this, and let's keep our guard up. Let's keep our elbows up on what could be something dangerous. We don't know, but we've learned some nasty lessons from how the pandemic was handled or mishandled in the past. On the story, which I've reported on for a couple of days now, the story of a young boy, Gaza boy, 5 years old. His name was Amir. You remember the story some months ago, with a person who was being called a U.S. soldier, saying that he befriended young Amir, and Amir was then just shortly after that shot dead by IDF soldiers for the crime of trying to get food. That story went viral. That story ignited the whole world with fury and anger against Israel, and that story has now been proven 100% categorically false. And I've talked about that for a couple of days. What bothers me is very few mainstream media outlets are reporting that the story has been proved categorically false. Young Amir, actually, whose last name is Mohammed, is not Amir, is alive and well, and with family and doing very well. Never was killed, obviously. But media, mainstream media outlets, very reluctant to admit their mistake, to admit it was a lie. Even Tucker Carlson, who ran that story and did an interview with the so-called soldier who lied and said he saw this happen, and there was the soldier and sobbing and his lip quivering. And I'll tell you what, it was emotional. Even Tucker Carlson has not come out and said and admitted that this story has been proven wrong and was a lie. You know, the problem with anybody fabricating lies like this, you are, in effect, if you're doing this, you're inciting people to violence. You're inciting mobs to violence. When you tell me, when I hear the story of a young boy getting killed, that makes me angry. That makes me want to do something. So I'm wondering if in the laws and charters of these various countries, if we don't have laws on the books, and I know in the US and in Canada we do, where if you are inciting somebody to become violent and inciting them to do a terrorist act, that is a crime. And you can go to jail for that, and you should go to jail for that. It's also a bit of a crime for the mainstream media who ran with that story not now to report that it was false. On the culture end of things, as we close out here today, we see in Canada one of our most beloved hockey stars, Connor McDavid, a great guy, great athlete, super family man, good community guy, and he's got a big dilemma because his $100 million contract is now winding down, and he's not immediately re-signing with the Edmonton Oilers. He's looking at his options. You know, there's been a fair bit of grief in the media saying and suggesting that this is a terrible thing, that he's considering his options. Listen, he's a business guy. He's a super athlete. I love watching him. I like listening to him. But the heartbreak and the preparation for emotional devastation that's building up in Edmonton if he was to ever leave, it's a little bit out of control. Look, I love the guy. But he's a multi-millionaire, and I'm not holding that against him in any way, shape, or form. And I hope he even gets wealthier with all the endorsements coming his way. But really, for us to get into an emotional upheaval that a smart business guy and athlete might move to a location that's going to be more beneficial to him and his family, let's just ease off a little. Let's think about those families, whether it's in Alberta, different parts of Canada, or wherever, who have to move because of economic reasons, and they don't have anywhere near the kind of financial support and financial sustenance to fall on. Let's think about those feelings and those people while we quite properly cheer on Connor McDavid and his family wherever they decide to go. Thanks, folks.